The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are my own or those of my guests, and in no way represent the views of the company or companies that I or we work for. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they are told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident.
You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast dedicated to the journey and the challenges surrounding the life and career of Aviator Tony, his co-hosts, and his guests. Together, we will explore the many pathways to an aviation profession, the realities of what a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Aviator Tony, an airline pilot currently flying for a U.S. legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. This is episode 65 of Squawk Ident, recorded on the 11th of December, 2020, from the Av8r Sound Studios from somewhere in Southern California. On today's show, I have the privilege in sitting down with my favorite podcast co-host from the podcast universe. Rob, Roger, and I wanted to spend this episode discussing recent events within our industry, our latest flying adventures or lack of flying adventures, and we wanted to share tribute to a legend in aviation that has recently taken his final flight west. Please join us as we tip our hats to Brigadier General Charles Elwood Yeager. Now that our pre-flight is complete, let's get ready to push off the gate. Start up those virtual podcast engines and get ready for takeoff. Squawk Ident, episode 65 is officially underway. Joining me at the controls is an exceptional aviator and co-host. He is a professional CFI, II, and MEI flight instructor, a former freight dog, a former airline pilot, a current King Air flight instructor, a Falcon 2000 commander, a captain, and a corporate operator as well. He joins us today from somewhere in San Diego, California, where he is hanging sheetrock and punching holes in the ceiling and floorboards. Please help me in welcoming back to the show, Captain Roger. Roger, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. You know, a little less flying lately, a little more home construction, and I think I'm ready to go back to flying.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you and I are in the same boat. I mean, I can't tell you how many projects I've started, at least.
I know, and it amazes me what you're able to do, and I'm just kind of blindly punching holes in the ceiling and floorboards and, you know, anywhere else that I might happen to swing a hammer accidentally.
Yeah, you know, I believe there's a Tom Hanks film from the late 80s or 90s that kind of reminds me every time you say you're starting a project. He was an architect. I can't remember the name of that movie. And they buy this beautiful Victorian home of some kind, and he's an architect, and he's, you know, going to remodel the whole thing, and it just turns into a giant disaster of construction and a lot of slapstick comedy with Tom Hanks falling through floorboards. And
yeah, unfortunately, I'm neither an architect, nor do I have a Victorian, nor am I Tom Hanks. So that's like the perfect trifecta of not so greatness, probably. But
no, I think it's quite the opposite. I think with your logical and very technical mind, you know, you've showed me some of the photos of the projects you've gotten started, and, you know, hey, they look great. And, you know, you and I kind of confer on what's going on and what's the best way of going about doing this. You know, the only reason I kind of know what I'm doing is I would say a DIYer, nothing more, nothing less, is simply because I grew up, you know, holding the flashlight for my dad, who we remodeled the house, I don't know how many times, you know, roofing, plumbing, electrical, laying concrete, you know, digging trenches, chopping down eucalyptus trees, going up there with climbing gear. And I mean, I was always by his side growing up. And that maybe really planted the seed for my interest in every home building TV show ever made, from, you know, This Old House to I think it was the Home Time, I think it was called, which was really, I think, where they got the idea for the TV show Tool Time later on. And so I came home from school, and instead of doing homework, I was watching on how to install insulation in a house in New Hampshire. It's like, why? I don't know. It just sparked my interest. So that's where my kind of interest in it came. And then I realized what Roger and Rob both have approached me on many times in the past year is the cost of doing repairs as a homeowner is astronomical if you're going to hire somebody else out to do the work. We're talking like almost $200 an hour for their labor, and you think a project might take a week? You might as well buy a new car. I mean, it's crazy how expensive things are. And I'm not saying it's not worth it to hire someone to do a job. It just know that it is going to be
there's some sticker shock involved with it.
Extreme.
Yes. And
so my hat's off to you both.
It is the cost of the car. I mean, to be honest, they're pretty high for home improvement projects now.
Yeah. And I think, we have we're before the show and the pre-show, we were kind of talking a little bit about, what's been going on. And, my neighbor across the street is a roofer, and he was telling us that his margins have shrunk significantly simply because the cost of plywood in the United States has increased so much. And I'm like, well, why? Why did wood or plywood suddenly get so expensive? And he said, well, it's doubled in cost, and his contractor cost, we're talking here. And it's because that we had so much with the lockdown and the rioting, and all this demand has gone up with plywood and wood materials in general, that it's really cut into his margins, and he's having a hard time being able to charge a competitive price and still pay all of his employees, their wage, and still bring home a margin of profit. So yeah, I could see how construction costs and contractor costs have gone up significantly in the past few months.
Yeah.
Well, also joining us today on another superb episode of Squawk Ident is another aviator, a Squawk Ident co-host, and a former international professional racquetball champion, a member of the 9G Club, an AMP and avionics tech, an RC aircraft commander, a boat skipper, a commercial drone operator, currently a 737 pilot for Legacy Airlines. The name we use here on the show is an alias to our employer, a U.S. mainline carrier. From his fortress of isolation, where the family's new teenage driver has decided to park her new car on the front lawn. From somewhere in Flower Mound, Texas, help me in welcoming back to the show, Mr. Rob D. Rob, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How you guys doing? So, thanks for getting up really early to join me and actually everybody else this morning for an early morning podcast. Got to get it out of the way before some visitors come into town this afternoon.
It's that time of the year, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. Yep, I have my daughters have a volleyball tournament this weekend, and my parents decided last minute to come into town and watch the game because they can't stand all the lockdowns they're going through up there in the Northeast. So
I was going to say, that kind of activity is illegal out here in California.
Exactly.
6 feet, 6 feet apart. Get away from each other.
6 feet.
6 feet.
Until you're on the court, then you can touch the same volleyball and give everybody high fives, and it's stupid. It's so stupid.
The logic is mind blowing. Now, I make it a very strong point not to get political on the show, and we won't get political on the show because that's not what this podcast is about. But I gotta say one thing. Please explain this to me. How going to Target, Walmart, Costco, Marshalls, JCPenney, Macy's, how is that essential enough to where you can cram hundreds, if not thousands of people in an aisle, and you're supposed to maintain 6 feet apart, but anybody that walks into a Target right now knows that, you do your best. Everyone looks at each other through their mask because you're too close. Get away. You're in my personal 6 feet space. But regardless, you're still crammed in line just to get in the building. Okay. Yeah. And that's okay. But we can't go and eat in a parking lot outside where it's 72 degrees in California right now. And you can't do that because that's dangerous. I mean,
It's all about mind control. That's the way I feel. It's all about mind control. It's a movement towards socialist and, just this, fear mongering and.
But what are you talking about, socialist? I'm a social guy. I like talking to you guys. What? Well, I just got to say, cheers for your parents to come down. I actually had my father visit us yesterday, and
Cool.
We went out and we didn't go to a restaurant because they're all shut down. We just had a nice day together. We ordered some really good chicken from a place down the street, Gallo Grillo or Gallo, something like that, and it's all over Southern California. It's this chain of really good, authentic Mexican food. And we got tortas and tacos and
nice,
and
so it sounds like the restaurants are open for takeout, carry out,
for takeout.
Like that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So you can go and, everything's roped off and they've got all the chairs are upside down and, but you can go in, you can order your food, step to the side, or they make you wait outside. And then they'll either text you, which I'm really loving this, where you go into a restaurant or a food establishment and you either put your name down before the lockdown, you'd put your name down for a table. And because of the reduced capacity, you can't wait in the lobby. So they would take your phone number, you would leave, you'd go out and hang out outside on the sidewalk or around the building or in the parking lot or in your car. And then they'd text you when your table was ready. Of course, your outdoor table. Yeah. Now that the lockdown is good, you go in, you place your order and pay for it. And then they get your phone number and then you go, they tell you, okay, go wait in your car. And then when your order is ready, they text you and they, have all the food ready for you at a table aside. So you're not in the same vicinity of where you were ordering. Yeah. And you pick up your food and you go. And it's really a nice way to expedite your experience, get in and out of there as quickly as possible, and not loiter. Yeah. So my hat's off to the process, and I think the technology that
they're doing the best they
using,
can. Yeah, they're doing the best they can, and that's certainly a good way to keep moving forward. I like it.
Yeah.
A lot of places over here are doing that too.
Yeah. And that's the way we have to kind of work until this now. I guess the news last night was the FDA has approved the use of the Pfizer vaccine. The question is, and I don't know if either one of you have seen any of this information, but there was a kind of a blurb on one of our union's news blasts that be careful as a professional aviator. Before taking the vaccine, consult with your FAA medical examiner, because we still don't know the total effects of a vaccine, and there could be potential side effects that may put your FAA medical at risk.
Yep.
And so the company right now hasn't released any kind of official statement on the vaccine because it is not yet available to us. But prior to that, there's a task force right now with our union that they are investigating the effects of the vaccine, which vaccine we may or may not be allowed to take.
Right.
So until we know with some level of certainty that the FAA has approved a particular vaccine, it's not just the FDA, but now as a pilot, we have to ensure that the FAA, the medical surgeon, has approved a particular vaccine.
Right. And probably just to reiterate to our listeners and potential viewers on YouTube, this pertains to all aviators. It's not just 121 airline pilots. I mean, it's if you have a class 3, a class 2, class 1 medical certificate, this could potentially affect you too. So if you're thinking about getting the vaccine, like Aviator Tony said, make sure you check with your medical examiner, because you're basically restricted from using prohibited or restrictive medications or anything that you put in your body before you operate an aircraft. So if the vaccine hasn't been approved by the AME medical examiners or the FAA medical, then you'll potentially can be operating an aircraft illegally. And worst case, if something happens and you had the vaccine inside of you when there was a mishap or an accident, or you kill somebody, that can really, really cause problems, not only for you legally, if you're still alive to do it, but also for, the all the, it could just open up a big can of worms with, could it be a problem with the vaccine? Could it be a problem with, just a whole bunch of things. So,
yeah. And we don't want to say don't take a vaccine. Obviously, I'll be in line. I have no problems if, by the time it becomes available to someone like myself, I'm sure that millions of people will have already taken it, and we will at least know a lot more about the potential side effects and whatnot. But what we're saying is don't rush to be the first one out there to get it. And maybe the Pfizer one is not approved for the FAA, but the Moderna one is. We don't know this yet. So until we have from the flight surgeon absolute which vaccine is approved for an FAA medical, make sure you dot your I's, cross your T's, and know exactly which one is going to be approved.
Yeah. And by the way, there's a list on the FAA website in the medical section of the website of approved and restricted or prohibited medications and stuff. So if you're taking anything, and I even had a eye infection a couple years ago, and the doctor prescribed a steroid eye drop for me to help it out, and come to find out that was on the prohibited list. So I had to go back to the to my optometrist, of all things. Who would think? I guess vision is something, but I had to go back to my optometrist and say, hey, is there an alternative that we could find that's not on this list of prohibited or prohibited medications that I can take so I can continue to operate my aircraft. So. Yeah.
And it's not always prescriptions. The over-the-counter medications can be prohibited as well. I know a lot of pilots deal with sinuses. I'm one of those persons that get seasonal allergies and allergies in general.
I think like Claritin. Claritin's like, I don't think that's, but Allegra D or Allegra, one of the Allegras are.
Yeah, antihistamine in general is prohibited because it makes you drowsy, and you can't operate heavy equipment with that, aka your first class medical, your second or third class medical. These items could potentially put you out or ground you for a period of time. Now, if you are home for a week or two and you got a really bad allergy flare up, sure, you can take some of these medications. Just they have to be out of your system before you're behind the controls of an aircraft. So do the homework. Especially for a new pilot. I didn't know this getting into it, and I've learned a little bit over the years about where I should go look before I take anything. And I've learned, what medications I can buy over the counter that are not going to be a problem, and I kind of stick to those. It doesn't limit you completely, but know that there are limitations, and you should look at those.
Yeah. Roger, how do we go down this wormhole? I don't know how we went off that tangent there.
You guys did kind of veer off there a little bit.
Well, you got to expand on this information.
Expertise of Captain Tony and Captain Rob D, ladies and gentlemen.
And we are not a medical professional in any way, shape, or form. So please consult your FAA medical examiner. Well, let's move on and just say thank you very, very much to Kareem from episode 64, Tenacious K. We had a wonderful time speaking to him. At such a young age, he has accomplished more than most in a lifetime. He is a go-getter, a New Yorker with real grit.
I'm walking here.
And we had a wonderful time having a discussion about his journey in aviation, about his flight school, and really impressed with the flight school and the campuses that they have at multiple airports in the New York tri-state area. And his YouTube presence and Instagram presence is huge. He's got a lot of followers, and just talk about an entrepreneur. It was an honor to have Kareem on.
He's such a bright young man. He's got a great future ahead of him, and wish him the very best. I think he's going to do very well.
Yeah. And we just posted a few videos from the previous show on YouTube, which is what I try to do with every show that we can, is put up a video or two on YouTube. It kind of is interesting to see, put a face to the voice and kind of see what we're trying to get done here and trying to get accomplished with the journey of today's aviator, the struggles and the challenges in today's marketplace, and discuss it all. So check us out on YouTube at Squawk Ident Podcast. We also had a very exciting week this week. My wife was saying, "Hey, you got 3 podcasts in a week? That's a bit much." Well, the other one wasn't a podcast. And he like, "You had 3 podcasts in a week?" Well, the truth is, we were invited. Rob and Roger and I were invited by a really wonderful student from Eastern Michigan University, Olivia Tomlinson. She reached out to us, put it all together. She's the vice president of the Willow Run Riveters, which is their chapter of Women in Aviation organization, and in association with Alpha Eta Rho Sigma Chi. I think that's the way you say it, right? She invited us to speak to a group of students in the EMU's Aviation Studies department. We had a great time speaking with them about our journeys and the challenges associated with navigating this profession. We were honored to have been asked to participate in the event, and we look forward to any future engagements with flight schools around the country. It was a really cool experience to talk to these young aviators, a lot of women in the group, and they were asking us questions that we here on the show like to talk about, but they asked us a few questions that we don't really talk about, we didn't think of. So I had a great time. What did you guys think?
I thought it was awesome, man. I love that kind of stuff. Fielding questions from eager young aviators like that, because we were in those shoes once, and whenever an experienced aviator walked into the room, the first thing you mostly wanted to know is just tell me stories, tell me some experiences, and it's really neat to be able to give back, that sort of thing back to people who are getting into the industry and really have a bright future ahead of them too.
Yeah, it's another great experience and another young aviator with a great future in front of her, and Olivia and her ability and willingness to go out and volunteer in all these capacities and all this stuff that she's doing both on and off the airport is great to see, in addition to everybody else that was part of that podcast. And hopefully, most important thing to me, just like Rob was just saying, was being able to hopefully give something back to them and help them answer any questions that they might have, so that it was a beneficial event for everybody that was involved. And I agree with Rob again. It was a great experience, and I was happy to be there.
Yeah, I was super excited because this really was our first event where we were asked to be guest speakers to an organization. And it kind of got me thinking, maybe the 3 of us should put together a presentation where if we get invited back to do something like this, that we can have a prepared speech or prepared examples of some of the hot topics and the most popular questions, and then field questions at the end from the students or aspiring professional pilots. Yeah. So big hats off and thank you again to Olivia for putting that together and reaching out to us. We had a wonderful time.
Thank you.
Now's the part of the show where we talk about From the Flight Line. Well, guys, we've been going back and forth and talking about the flying or lack thereof, and I just have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that I'm what they call a zero timeline guy at Legacy Airlines, which means I am not allowed to bid for a schedule for 6 months. It was part of the program or the TA that the union was able to knock out with the company to help prevent or minimize furloughs. Now, the company did furlough quite a few pilots. I believe the latest number was more than 1,200 pilots that are out on furlough, meaning, well, what's furlough? Some of our listeners might go, what is that? If you're going to get into this aviation industry, you got to understand that the aviation industry in general is very cyclical. And it is usually a direct indicator of how the economy or the marketplace around the world really is, how healthy it is. And so when there's a downturn, the fastest way a professional aviator company, not just an airline, but commercial operators as well, the easiest way to cut costs when demand is low is to minimize payroll. And part of that is pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, and not just that, but every aspect of the field. So furloughing is something that we try to minimize, but it does happen. And it tends to be kind of around 10-year cycles. Wouldn't you say, Rob? It's like every 10 years, there's like some kind of economic event where there's a downturn.
Something happens 10 years that just, shakes the whole industry. It could be stock markets. It could be terrorism. As you can tell right now, it's a pandemic. So, it seems every 10 years there's some kind of a downturn in the industry that forces cutbacks or layoffs, furloughs. It's just
And so this is where we sit. Now, Rob was fortunate enough to get hired a little bit before me at Legacy through that agreement, and so he was not affected in the same way I was affected. Roger, as a Part 91 or a private operator, he fortunately has been able to keep flying, keep his position, and so these guys are in good shape right now. I am very lucky, I think, to not have been furloughed. I was hired just by happenstance. I was hired at a time where I didn't make that furlough cutoff. I was actually above it, but I was forced into a conditional zero timeline, meaning I cannot bid for a schedule. I do not have a monthly guarantee. And the only flying I can achieve is whatever I get to pick up either through other pilots that are like, hey, I don't want to fly this trip. Instead of dropping it, I'm going to trip trade with you. Do you want the trip? And there are different forums that we're currently using between social media and apps that the company sponsors and apps that the company doesn't sponsor. And so there are multiple ways, and I am on all of it. I made it a point to learn how to manipulate whatever I needed to do so that if the opportunity comes up, I can pick up a trip here and there. And I've been very fortunate. I was kind of worried about it at the beginning of the month because I only had like 2 trips. One was on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and the other was New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Obviously, people don't want to fly on those. They want to be with their family. And I was able to pick up flying from other pilots. But I was also awarded flying recently for like day trips here and there from the company's scheduling department. I used an app that the company sponsors that says, hey, if you put in your criteria and there's an opportunity for a trip based on your seniority, we'll award it to you. And I was awarded that. So not quite what I'm used to in terms of flying. About half the flying that I usually do, but still able to fly. But Rob has not flown since our last
28th
podcast.
of February. Yeah.
So what has that been
February?
like?
20th of November. I say February. That was a long time ago. 20th of November. So we went from November to December, and my schedule didn't have any flying until the 18th of December. So I've virtually just been, have a unscheduled vacation without pay because I'm not flying up until the 18th of December, which, to be honest with you, I'm kind of enjoying it. I don't have very many hours this month to begin with. I think I had the minimum value. I think I had like 70 or 72 hours to begin with. I had a what they call a hybrid line, which is a combination of reserve and scheduled flying. So but I only had 2 days of obligation for reserve, and because there isn't that much flying out there to be had, those 2 days came and gone. So actually, I was technically on duty a couple days ago, but I didn't get called out to fly. So yeah, I've been quite lucky. I was able to drop a 4-day trip to a zero time line pilot over here in the Dallas area. So he was he was so thankful, and I'm glad I was able to do that because he had 0 hours, and he was just now starting to figure out how to do all that stuff. And it was my first time actually dropping a trip to another pilot too. So felt good to be able to do that. And I think he got like 24-hour 3-day or 23-hour. I'm sorry, 24-hour 4-day, or is a 23-hour 4-day trip that begins on the 23rd. So I've got my bid in for next month. We'll see what we have. It's kind of, this whole thing has affected me negatively, and not like these furloughs or zero timeline guys. I mean, those guys have it really bad. But for me, I was, like you said, I was lucky to make the cut and not get furloughed. However, I suffered in my own, pity way with seniority. I went from bidding about 50% in base down to 98%. So my quality of life, although it's all relative, right? I'm getting a lot of time off as it is, but I don't get the schedule that I want. I like to fly in around 85 hours. And there's just not enough in the schedule for me to have that. So I'm stuck with what I have, and 70 hours is not bad either. I can survive on that. And like I said, I was able to drop 20 hours off, 23 hours off to another pilot. So I'm okay. I can do it. But I like to be up in the mid 80s. If I get up into the 90s, that's great. But I'm taking it, and taking it in stride. They say if God gives you lemons, make lemonade. So,
well, my hat's off to you.
Yeah.
For dropping one of your trips, because when you drop a trip as a line holder, when you drop a trip to a zero timeline pilot, you forfeit that pay.
Exactly.
So, you gave 24 hours of pay to a pilot that had 0 hours of pay.
Potentially thousands of dollars I just gave the guy.
Yeah. And thank you so much. On behalf of the zero timeline pilots at Legacy Airlines, I thank you, sir. That just is a testament to your generosity and to all the pilots.
Take care of everybody. Got to take care of each other. That's what a union should be doing. And unfortunately, ours isn't doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that goes into we could go into a 10-hour episode. And Roger's like, you guys complain about what?
You know it.
And speaking of Roger, what you have not been flying either. You've been getting some pantries built and sheetrocked, and what's going on?
Yeah, I've had about the last 2 weeks off, I guess, which is kind of a welcome change because I've been working 3 months straight. I was working all the time, and I think it's kind of just the lull after Thanksgiving. The week of Thanksgiving, or the week and a half around Thanksgiving, I worked a fair amount. I was down in Cabo, and that whole post-Thanksgiving weekend, doing multiple international trips with all the rigmarole that goes along with customs on both sides of the border, which I think actually, all things considered, went about as well as you could expect it on one of the busiest travel days of the year. I can tell you firsthand that private jet operators were out in full force. I'll just kind of put it that way, because the ramps were crammed full of planes everywhere, private jets everywhere.
So the FBO was hard to find parking.
It was
at the FBO.
There was no parking at the FBO. You're pushed into overflow parking on the other side of the airport. And definitely some delays. Like I say, I'm fortunate to be able to say that it went about as well as you could have expected it, but that bar was pretty low also, just because it was a madhouse.
Yeah.
And especially when, down in Mexico, where things kind of run at a little bit of a different pace. But we got in and got out twice in one day, actually. So that all that went pretty well. And yeah, for about 2 weeks now, ever since that Sunday after Thanksgiving, I actually haven't had to do anything. There have been a couple trips. However, I was not actually responsible for them. So.
Oh, nice. And you've been getting, like we mentioned, a little bit of construction done on your chateau there in San Diego. Yeah.
We've been, some construction, lots of destruction. So, hopefully we'll find our way back here.
Yeah.
Maybe before Christmas comes.
Well, you want to be able to finish those projects before you have to go back to a full schedule again.
I'm really good at starting things. It's the finishing that it sometimes leaves a little to be desired.
Yep. On behalf of wives everywhere around the world. Yep.
Yeah. And it's, unfortunately, it's so discouraging too, because, when you do projects like this, you always end up you make a bigger mess to begin with. It's always like that. And so then you're left with a house of a construction zone. And in my case, because of the sheetrock and drywall, there's drywall dust everywhere. And it's, so there's construction going on. There's, sheetrock, drywall, plywood lying around, and I only live in a condo, and so I don't even have a garage, so everything's just kind of piled up on the patio. There's drywall dust coating everywhere in the kitchen and in the house and in the bathroom, and it's just.
I'm not allowed to do that because that's the way I used to operate. I'm like, hey, well, we're doing construction. What do you expect? Now it's like, no, at the end of your construction, if we say you're going to be done at 7, at 6 o'clock, you're done because that last hour and every particle of dust that you created better be picked up. So what I do, I have buckets, and unfortunately it does take time away from the time allotted, but I'm kind of glad that this is the new way I'm doing things in the past probably 5-6 years, because I have buckets of where I just put all my tools in a bucket. That way I don't have to go and dig them out and put them back and all that stuff. And that bucket, goes back into the shed, and I have to vacuum and dust and all that stuff and take down all the plastic tarps because everything has to be tarped. And then the shop vac comes out and I vacuum everything up. And then the next day, or whenever I get a chance to get back to that project, all I got to do is bring out the tarps and bring out the buckets of tools. And now I can get back to it without, having to spend all this time collecting everything. And the tools sometimes, a day or two of a project and they go back, they get cleaned and put back. Other times I start the project, like my garage door, the trim around the garage door was rotten. It's 40 years old. So I removed it all, replaced it all with some new redwood 2x4s and trim pieces, and had to primer it and paint it. I got started on painting the garage door. I had to repair the garage door because the top panel of the garage door, this panel door, the metal started to come undone, and so it was a big deal. So I had to drill out some rivets and repair it, and I put some wood support beams on each side so that it's a little bit more sturdy. So it was kind of a big project. And day before yesterday, it's like, okay, it's getting late, time to clean up. I'm like, but I only have like one panel of paint left on the door. Yeah, but it's time to clean up. Okay. So you drive by my house, I've got 3 white panels and 1 like off-white panel on my garage door. And it'll probably be that way for a few days because we've had other things going on. And so hopefully I can get back to it before I got to go fly again. Otherwise, there'd be paint buckets and stuff sitting all over the garage, and then
flying all over.
I got to bring my car in. I don't want to leave my car out. You better get it cleaned up. But yeah.
That's funny. I as y'all know from previous podcasts and stuff, I just went through a little house renovation project myself. It lasted quite a long time, a little over a month, just because they did it in phases. But like you guys were saying, the amount of dust that accumulates is just unbelievable.
It's unreal, isn't it?
Unbelievable.
And if you have allergies like me, look out. Next day, migraine. I just feel like crap.
So here's kind of the funny story tied into aviation, I guess. As you all know, I fly RC airplanes. Well, I haven't flown my models in quite a long time because I've been just distracted with other things, with the kids with volleyball, and I bought a boat and all that stuff. And so anyway, the other day it was a beautiful day here in Texas. The winds were really calm, and temperature was forecasted to be in the 70s. So I said, hey, let's go out and fly some model airplanes. Perfect day to do that. So I went into my garage, and my models hang from the ceiling. And I pulled down a model, and it had literally an eighth of an inch of dust, sawdust, and just junk that's been floating around in the atmosphere. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder if this is like, frost or snow on a wing. Let's see if this plane will fly with us. Let's see if it has enough drag. So I just took one airplane, and it's loose, so it just blew right off it. But man, I mean, it was literally, an eighth of an inch of dust, man. It was crazy.
Did you get that new de-dusting card from the FAA? Huh?
Yeah, I had to get the whole, your aircraft is clean.
You get type 1 dust removal?
Type 1 and 4, started 4 minutes ago.
And you know what? That's a great idea for a future podcast. This year I have not yet had to de-ice, although I did have a...
Man, I haven't even had a chance to wear my Christmas epaulets or anything like that. Nothing.
Oh, really?
Nothing.
Yeah. I got to wear my Christmas tie, even though it's not officially approved anymore. What's wrong with the Legacy Airlines, man?
I don't think they can.
It's no longer in the handbook. I even looked because I have my candy cane striped tie that I wear. But
what's a tie?
You don't wear a tie.
He wears a polo shirt,
tie. I mean, never mind.
And shorts.
Well, I have flown in shorts and flip flops.
And flip flops. I don't know if
not. I flew that was in the 7X, in the Falcon 7X. I flew a Falcon 7X from Miami in shorts and flip flops. It was not supposed to happen. However, when your client shows up an hour and a half early and you haven't changed clothes yet, we put a priority in getting him out of there. I literally flew in shorts, t-shirt, and flip flops until we got up, and then I went into the galley. I changed.
That is awesome.
But I kid you not, Falcon 7X, shorts, t-shirt, and flip-flops to complete the ensemble.
Ladies and gentlemen, we do not recommend flying in flip-flops or traveling
on an airplane. I do not recommend flying in flip-flops. However, it can be done.
It can be done. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I have been flying, gentlemen. And like I said, how is this? I'm the zero time guy, and I the one that it's been flying. It's kind of crazy, but we talked a little bit or spoke a little bit about the flying that I had accomplished. I think an episode or two ago, I did some flying over the Thanksgiving holiday, Myrtle Beach Thanksgiving. It was a wonderful experience. We did 30 hours there. I think we have talked about that a little bit. But what I did want to mention is there was a situation coming out on the very last leg of that sequence. Now, we all know about the go home leg. Okay, the go home leg is if you're flying 4 days and you have 2 legs per day, anything that can go wrong will go wrong, but not until the very last leg of the sequence, which is the go home leg. It's Murphy's Law. That's just the way it works. When you're doing the pre-flight briefing, your captain will look at you and go, any potential threats? Yeah, it's the go home leg. Enough said. And usually that gets a laugh and you're like, yeah, you're right. So we spend a little extra time and effort in making sure that everything is copacetic, and we, again, dotted our I's and crossed our T's and ready to go. Well, what happened was we were ready to go. The airplane had come in. They did a cleaning of the aircraft, a sanitation of the aircraft, and then as soon as that was complete, we were able to get on the airplane. We did our pre-flight. The flight attendants did their pre-flight security checks, and we started boarding the aircraft. We were already a little bit behind schedule because the inbound flight was a little bit delayed. So instead of having the normal amount of time allotted between turns, it was a little tight. And so we didn't really feel rushed, but it was a little bit less downtime than we were used to. And as soon as the flight attendant said, all right, all secure, ready to close the door, and Kevin's like, sure. So we closed the cabin door of the aircraft, and the flight attendants did their final walkthrough. This is where they walk up and down the cabin to make sure that all cell phones are off, the seat belts are all fastened, all the carry-on items are stowed either under the seat in front of them or in an overhead bin. They make sure that all the overhead bins are closed. Once that's complete, they come up to the cockpit, the purser does, and says, okay, we're all secure. And the captain gives a thumbs up. They secure the cockpit door, and we are underway. Well, as soon as that happened on that go-home leg, the ramp that I called, we had a ramp frequency in DFW. It was a DFW to LA flight. And I called them up and I said, Legacy 123, we're ready for pushback off of gate, whatever it was. And the ramp said, hold your push, Legacy. We have a cabin cleaner that left their keys in the first overhead bin in first class. And the captain goes, oh, okay. I'll have the flight attendant take a look, and if we find them, we'll pass them through the window or something. So the purser went and looked and came back like a minute later and said, no, we checked. We looked in both overhead bins on both sides, and the first one, as indicated, and we didn't see anything. There's nothing there. And so the captain relayed that to the ramp, and now the MOD, the manager on duty, gets on the same frequency and says, yeah, Captain, this is the cleaner's house keys and car keys, and she's really upset. Is there any way we can hook up the jet bridge and look for them? And we look over on the jet bridge, which has already been removed from the aircraft about 10 feet away, and she's standing there on the jet bridge on the phone. And the captain's like, you know what? I'll go look. Okay, if it makes her feel, I'll go look. So the captain gets up, goes to the back, removes all the suitcases, has the passengers in the first row of the cabin look in the seat back pockets, look in between the seats, make sure that our keys didn't get, lost somewhere there. And he comes back a minute later and says, look, we checked everything. I checked personally. The keys are not on board this aircraft, at least not in the location where she's indicating. And he's like, well, Captain, let's hook up the jet bridge. He goes, wait a minute. And now he's getting upset. And I completely understand why. He says, we are so just hammered out on time departure. We will leave people behind if they're late to the gate. If they're not at the gate 15 or 10 minutes prior to departure, or 30 minutes prior to departure if it's an international flight, we will shut the door and not let them on the plane, and they'll miss their flight so that we can get an on-time departure, because that's the way it's written. And yet here we are over a pair of keys. We're gonna delay this flight over a pair of keys. Is that what you're telling me? And he's like, oh, I'm sorry, Captain, hold on. And so now another voice comes on. It's now the ramp employee that says, well, well, I think it's out of my hands. It's, the MOD wants to do this, and I totally understand, but so she's trying to bring down the captain a little bit because he's getting upset. And he goes, I can't believe, he looks at me, he goes, I can't believe this. And I'm like, well, we're going home. It's our go home link. But the flight attendants, I remembered from speaking to them when I introduced myself, they're doing a turn. They're coming right back to DFW. If they find it after the flight, they could easily bring back the keys if they were left on board. So he goes, oh, that's a good point. So he tells the operations manager, hey, the flight attendants are coming right back after like an hour or two sit in LA. They can bring them back tonight if they find them. How about that? And they're like, no, it's okay. We just want her to look. And the captain goes, fine, connect the jet bridge. And he goes, now takes his headset off. He's like, just unbelievable. Like, this is what we're doing. So he makes a PA to the passenger saying, ladies and gentlemen, someone's left something very important on the aircraft. We apologize. We just need to reconnect the jet bridge, have them look, and then we'll be on our way, And as soon as he finished that, he then told the MOD, this is what we're going to do. We're not leaving until she comes on and looks in the overhead, because obviously my word isn't good enough for you or her, and a flight attendant's word isn't good enough for you or her. So this is what we're going to do. And they're like, whoa, we don't need to do that. And I guess they told her, you're going to go on that airplane and look for them because you're insistent that, you get them. And I can understand, you kind of panic. Yeah. You're like, oh crap, how am I going to get home? And sure. I totally get it. She didn't like that. So what did she do? Turn around, go up the jet bridge. She was out of there. She's like, I'm not going to embarrass myself in front of them. So we ended up taking about a 20-minute delay. It's the first time in my experience to ever take a delay for something like this. Normally, they're very insistent. No, that's okay. If you find them, turn them in a lost and found in Los Angeles or something like that. Or here's the name and phone number of the manager. If you find them, call the manager. We'll have it shipped or mailed to the customer. Something, But it was such a rarity to take a delay at the gate for something like this that I just thought I'd mention it. Now, I understand going above and beyond for a customer, for an employee even, but this was a new one for me, and I didn't really know how to react or how to feel about it because part of me wants to help out the cabin cleaner who thought they lost their keys on the aircraft. But another part of me says, well, hey, we had like 5 people in the grand scheme of things looking for these keys where she believed she left them and they weren't there. So why was that not good enough to say, okay, yeah, they looked and it wasn't there. It's got to be somewhere else. Or maybe I dropped them, somewhere else. So that was really weird. And, but in the end, I have no idea if they retrieve their keys and God, that sucks because replacing a car key, we're talking hundreds of dollars, and then unless you have a spare key at home. Oh,
yeah, totally. Yeah, and we don't even know if any of those keys on there were to jet bridges or things that have access to, secure areas in the airport or anything like that.
Well, it was a cabin cleaner, so I'm assuming that it was just personal keys. But
yeah, I'm sure
it's probably.
But why would they put the personal keys, set them down, and in the airplane?
That's what I said.
I think it was probably a jet bridge key because you need a jet bridge key to get up from the ramp and all that stuff. So
do they have or just their lead has it, or do all employees have it?
I don't know. I know they travel around in like a little team, and usually they all hop out of a van up the jet bridge, open up the jet bridge door, and then do their cleaning, and then they all kind of egress at the same time.
I can't tell you what I'm picturing right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Cleaning. Squeaky, squeaky.
Roger's like, I do
bunch
that.
Of penguins.
I do that myself.
Yeah, but you have to clean up after. You have to clean up after what, 2-3 people at the most. They're cleaning up after 190 people every flight, and they get an entire airplane turned around in 15 minutes. I think they do a phenomenal job.
Cheerios so if you're on the floor that they're stepping on.
Stickers, that's my favorite. When you're traveling with a child and everybody deplanes and you walk to the back for whatever reason and you see 1,000 stickers all over the seat back, the seat, the
sidewall.
And you're like, are you kidding me?
Right.
Just you let your child do that. I mean, that's fine, but clean up after yourself before you land.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how like where people get the rationale to do some of the things that they do themselves or that they allow their children to do, and then they just get up and walk away. It's like the kind of the lack of accountability that we have as a culture never ceases to amaze me.
You actually are saying something that really can be contributed to 90, I think, % of what's wrong with our society, including what's currently going on in politics and social aspects and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, so that was that trip. I thought I'd mention that. I hope you got some value out of that story. The next sequence I did was the 30th of November. Did a Guadalajara, Charleston, and Detroit layover. I'm not going to go into detail because I don't want to run over on time today because we have an exciting bit coming up on a tribute to a wonderful aviator that we're going to kind of get into. But so on the 30th, I did a trip and went into Guadalajara, and we had to follow a procedure that Legacy Airlines has with escape routes. Now, these are a little bit different than drift down tables and whatnot. So what's an escape route? So we're traveling to central Mexico, and there's mountainous terrain. We have moras, we've mentioned it before on the show, that are up to 17 17.5, something like that. So if you have a rapid cabin depressurization, you're supposed to descend to 10,000 feet so that the cabin altitude can be acceptable for human breathing. And so, because the O2 for the passengers is very limited. Usually it's about 12 to 15 minutes, something like that. So you have time to get down, but you can't get down to 10,000 feet because of some of these grid mores being so high. Well, if this is the scenario, this is only one scenario that could potentially happen. You can't just slam dunk it. You have to follow a particular path. And the company engineering department has put together these escape routes. So as you're flying along, you have to plug into your FMC or your flight management computer or FMGC, all these waypoints that you're closest to with an 80-mile ring around it. And as you pass through, you're constantly looking at, okay, if we have a bang right now, where am I going to go direct to? And once you're on that particular route, then you can descend further to 10,000 feet cabin altitude, but not until you're on this particular route. So it's an escape route. And they'll take you to an airport that's an approved airport, usually around sea level, so that you can get away from the mountainous terrain and you can get down and land at a suitable emergency airport. So that was fun to do it. And I did that Guadalajara trip twice this month or last month. So
a lot of terrain headed down in that direction for sure.
Yeah. And when I went into Guadalajara, it was my leg. It was at night. It was on a landing to the east. So as you're descending on the path for lining up for an ILS and with glide slope indication, you have to make sure that you follow the restrictions of the step down, even if you are, like what we were, cleared for the visual. So I was looking at that, and the terrain is downsloping as you're descending. So you're following the terrain down to the final approach fix. It's relatively intimidating because it was at night and you couldn't see anything. It was just a big black hole. You could see the city ahead. You could see some of the lights of the mountains and the houses on the mountains around you, but the path didn't have anything under it. So it was like, whoa, this is weird. And so that's what it was. We got a little bit of a slam dunk, but the controllers, they kind of wait till the last second. They tell you, okay, descend or descend via. So you got to really be on your toes.
That's right.
Thankfully, it was a very nice trip. I did want to mention we did have a little bit of excitement where the captain and I looked at each other. We had a flight attendant that once we all got off the hotel van at the hotel, the van driver comes around and pulls out all your bags and puts them on the curb. And, once they're done, everybody gives them a tip, a couple bucks here and there, and to thank them for taking care of the bags and getting us there safely. And the flight attendant, one of them was talking and she looks down and realizes her lunch bag wasn't on the curb. And so she's talking, and all of a sudden she goes, my lunch bag. No, that's my lunch bag. Yeah, you have my lunch bag. You have my lunch bag. She's like
freaking
went
out
from totally green, having a conversation with her fellow flight attendant to going in the red. You got my lunch bag. Like the van driver's just standing there, not having an opportunity to even go, what? So the van driver turns around, reaches in, finds his lunch bag that he unfortunately neglected to see, and pulled it out, handed it to her, and then everything was okay now. We all proceeded into the hotel and I just
thank God it wasn't a real emergency, right?
I was like, oh wow, that escalated real quick. It was jarring.
Oh man, I had a similar incident like that. It wasn't really, we didn't get into the red, but we were overnighting in Miami, and we were coming from the Sherry, and we had two crews on the same van going back to the airport. This is back when we were Sandpiper. And so I remember getting off the van, and the van driver just kind of putting our bags together for us. And what ended up happening was he accidentally got our kit bags, which at the time was the bag that, carried all of our charts, paper charts, that 36-pound bag that we used to carry around. Right?
Yeah. 40.
Right. Yeah. It was heavy. Well, a lot of our crew members had the same kit bag, so they looked identical, and mine particularly didn't have any any marks on it that made it identified it as mine. It was just very plain looking, and in this particular case too, the other one was the same way. So the van driver accidentally put the wrong kit bag with the wrong overnight bag. So basically, when I grabbed my overnight bag, I had the other pilot's kit bag.
Oh.
And so the other pilot, when he grabbed his overnight bag, he had my kit bag. So anyways, we part our separate ways, go through security, and I get to the gate and start pre-flighting my airplane, and I go down to open up my kit bag, and it's locked. And I'm like, that's funny. I usually don't lock my kit bag. So I try to do the code and the kit bag wouldn't open. And I'm like, geez, what is wrong? I'm trying to think if I changed it or if it accidentally got changed, and I'm starting to get a little flustered here. And then I realized, hey, this must be the other guy's kit bag. And thankfully I remembered where he was going. So I looked it up on the computer to figure out what gate he was going out of. So I just lugged the 36-pound kit bag from, I think it was Terminal D in Miami all the way around to Terminal E.
Oh man,
where he was going out of. And then, but luckily he had, just come to the same realization that he had the wrong kit bag too. So he was walking back towards D, because all he knew was that I was going out of the D terminal, because I didn't follow him into the terminal. So we kind of met where the little they used to have that little art gallery,
the connector,
right in the change area there. And so we kind of laughed at each other. We're like, wow, thank God, we figured out where each other was, and we got each other our kit bags, and that could have gone horribly wrong.
Or if one of you took the train, you wouldn't have ran into each other.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
So, I guess we'd say we went into the yellow on that one.
You went into the yellow. Yeah, but nobody freaked out.
Nobody freaked out.
Back,
yeah. Yeah, no, we didn't get into the red.
And for those listeners that are been aviators only for about maybe 10 years or so, there was a time when we each had to carry around something called
paper manuals.
Well, these paper manuals, it was important to have them in a secure bag. We would carry these rectangular, like a salesman bag. It was a kit bag, the hardcover, really nice leather ones, and regional pilots usually had the Kevlar fabric ones, and so that's what we had, and they all looked the same because they were all the $99 one that we could afford.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they also pretty much everybody in training bought their bag at the same place. Not everybody did, but when you show up for ground school first day, everybody starts asking, "Hey, what kind of kit bag should I get?"
Yeah,
and inevitably everybody starts buying the same kit bag. So
the cheapest one.
You're walking around the airport. Yeah, the cheapest one, but they all look the same. Yeah. But the important thing too is most people don't realize, which we probably shouldn't talk about too much, but that bag contained the ops manual for the company, and inside the ops manual is some security sensitive information. So if that got into the wrong hands, obviously in this case it was another. In this case is another pilot, so it wasn't too big of a deal. But
now it's all on your tablet, which has a secure code
security
that you
passcode,
obviously. Yep. So and if your tablet gets lost, you call company and they automatically wipe it remotely.
Yep.
So
it's pretty cool.
Very cool. And Roger, do you still have your kit bag from back in the day?
I have the bag. It's up in the attic. Probably never to see the light of day again, but I do still have it.
I bet you that
nice
you could probably put that on
some steel runners on the bottom.
Oh, you got the nice one. Yeah.
Wow. You could probably put that for sale on Facebook Marketplace and make.
I could probably get at least a quarter for it.
Yeah. Well, you'd be surprised. A lot of people like that stuff. I was looking for one just for nostalgia reasons, a good leather one. And
it's actually still in decent shape.
Yeah.
And like I said, because even the bottom's in good shape too, because I did have them put some metal runners on the bottom so it didn't get scuffed up too.
A lot of legacy pilots still like those things. They, they'll throw their iPad and a whole bunch of stuff in there though.
Well, they fit stuff,
They fit a lot of stuff.
No, in the bus, though, it's kind of a pain because when the seat goes back and moves over, if the kit bag is too big, or even my bag is a soft computer bag that I keep everything in, even that, and it's small. It's way smaller than my kit bag, and that rubs up against. I can't get it in there unless I move the seat away from the wall. So
I got a contrail bag, and even that thing, I think it's a 370. It's not the large one, but it's the next one down. Even that thing. When I put my seat to the side, it still crunches it.
It rubs.
It's not a lot of room back there.
Yeah. But speaking of, changes in how we operate in kit bag stuff, we just had a new ruling from the FAA in regards to comfort animals. And from 1 mile at a time, just a quick article, is this the end of emotional support animals on airplanes, they ask, from an article written by Ben72 on December 2nd, 2020. The U.S. Department of Transportation has just issued a final ruling that will greatly change how emotional support animals can travel on flights. This is major and has the potential to end the concept as we know it. An emotional support animal is any animal companion that offers some type of benefit to an individual with some form of disability. Now that is key. This is different than a service animal, which is specifically trained and might assist someone who is maybe blind or deaf, for example. And we also see a lot of these specially trained service animals with vets with PTSD. So essential for them in their travel. But a comfort animal is a little different. The ESA concept or the emotional support animal concept is only a thing in the U.S. No other country has this, and it's been controversial. I mean, people have brought peacocks, miniature horses. I've seen a boa constrictor as a comfort animal. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And the incidences of people getting bit by these comfort or ESA animals has gone up. Even here, they quoted in there, there have been things from turkeys to pigs to miniature horses on planes. The reality is that getting an ESA certification has been quite easy, as there are doctors online who can provide it. Just Google and you'll see the options. So anybody that wants to travel with Fluffy can, just by going online, getting a doctor to say, hey, this is an ESA, sure. And then you don't have to pay the extra fees and whatnot, and you can bring your animal with you on vacation. And most airlines only allow pets up to 20 pounds in the cabin, but many people haven't wanted to put their pets in the cargo hold for good reason, because there are nightmare stories about pets and not making it in a cargo hold for whatever reason. But the ESA was the way to get around that. And since you can bring larger animals into the cabin of the aircraft, people were bringing in all kinds of weird animals. My favorite story is we had a law enforcement officer who identified themselves and went through all the necessary security protocols, and they had their firearm with them, which they're allowed to do as long as their agency, whoever they work for, gives them the permission to fly with their firearm. And then they present that to the airline, and the airline lets the captain and the cabin crew know that you're going to have a law enforcement officer on the aircraft. Well, the law enforcement officer came into the cockpit and said, hey, I'm your Leo. Just wanted to introduce myself. And the captain turned and saw that this Leo had a small dog. And he goes, oh, you're traveling with your pet, really? And she's like, yeah, it's my comfort animal. Like, wait a minute. You're armed and you have a comfort animal for flying. Well, yeah. No.
What kind of psychiatric condition are you in to have a comfort animal and you have a gun?
So after quite a bit of a debate, let's call it, the captain, stepped off the aircraft with the person and a few managers at that, and said, "I think we need to call your commanding officer and find out if he's aware that you're got a firearm aboard a aircraft with a comfort animal because of you need comfort to fly." And she immediately said, "Nope," and turned around and walked off. She's trying to get Fluffy to go with her to Nana's house and didn't want to have to pay the fees of bringing an animal into the cockpit or into the cabin. And so everyone I know that is in the industry completely supports the elimination of comfort animals. Do it the classic way. Just drink heavily. No, I'm kidding. Don't drink heavily. So
hire a baby dog sitter or whatever.
Yeah,
right? Drop it off at grandma's house.
Comfort animals.
So
let's see what most airlines that have already said. Okay, that's it, no more. And I applaud them for the decision.
Yep.
Well, we'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsors. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from the break. Well, a lot of things have happened here in the last few weeks between what's going on in the news cycle, what's going on in aviation with the downturn from the TSA numbers. The president-elect had indicated on multiple platforms, now is not the time to travel. Do not travel this holiday. Wait until, the vaccine comes out. And we were seeing record numbers around Thanksgiving, as Roger had mentioned before. Also in the GA world, they were seeing record numbers as well of people traveling, flying, getting around. And we saw the highest numbers since pre-pandemic flying going through TSA checkpoints. And unfortunately, after the warnings that, hey, if you travel, all you're going to do is kill Nana. And, you're going to spread to this new wave, and we're going to have more people dying from this COVID than ever before if we continue down this path. And that really took a toll in the traveling public's confidence. And we went from seeing over 1 million travelers a day to now, just yesterday and the day before, around 500,000. So yes, there's been a huge reduction in the trend of people flying. Well, amongst all of this news, we also had a very tragic loss. On December 7th, 2020, we lost a legend in aviation. We here at the Squawk Ident podcast wanted to tip our hat to the man that we aviators considered to exemplify what it means to be the best of us, the number one top ace, a pioneer to what it means to be soaring above the earth, being the first to break barriers for all of us. How many times has a pilot said, "I flew that bird like I was Chuck," or "I'm no Chuck, but..." Well, today, we here at the Squawk Ident podcast have decided to pay tribute to the late Brigadier General Charles Elwood Yeager. Born on February 13th, 1923, in Mira, West Virginia, to parents Susie Mae Sizemore and Albert Hal Yeager. Chuck was the son of farmers. He had 4 siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. The family moved to Hamlin, West Virginia, where he attended Hamlin High School. There, he played basketball and football while receiving top grades in geometry and in typing. He attended the Citizens Military Training Camp at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, Indiana, during the summers of 1939 and 1940. He later graduated from Hamlin High School in June of 1941. Soon after graduation from high school, Yeager did what many young men did in his time. He enlisted as a private in the U.S. Army Air Forces, the USAAF, on September 12, 1941, and became an aircraft mechanic at George Air Force Base in Victorville, California.
At the time of his enlistment, Yeager was not eligible for flight training because of his age and educational background. However, the United States' entry into World War II, less than 3 months later, prompted the USAAF to alter his recruiting standards. It was discovered that Yeager had unusually sharp vision, a visual acuity rated at 20/10. At the time of his flight training acceptance, he was a crew chief on an AT-11. He later received his pilot wings and a promotion to flight officer at Luke Field in Arizona, where he graduated from Class 43C on March 10th of 1943. He was assigned to the 357th Fighter Group in Tonopah, Nevada, where he initially trained as a fighter pilot, flying Bell P-39 Airacobas. He was later shipped overseas with the group on November 23rd, 1943.
Yeager was stationed in the United Kingdom at RAF Leiston, where he flew P-51 Mustangs in combat with the 363rd Fighter Squadron. He named his P-51 Mustangs Glamorous Glen after his girlfriend Glenys Faye Dickhouse, who later became his wife in February of 1945. Yeager had gained one victory before he was shot down over France in his first aircraft, a P-51, on March 5th, 1944. It was on his 8th mission. He escaped to Spain on March 30th with the help of the Maquis, which is the French resistance, and returned to England on May 15th of 1944. During his stay with the Maquis, Yeager assisted the guerrillas in duties that did not involve direct combat. He helped construct bombs for the group. He was awarded the Bronze Star for helping a navigator, Omar M. Pat Patterson Jr., to cross the Pyrenees mountain range.
Despite a U.S. military regulation prohibiting evaders or pilots that escaped from behind enemy lines from flying over enemy territory again, to prevent resistance groups from being compromised by a second capture, Yeager was reinstated to flying combat. Yeager joined with another evader, a fellow P-51 pilot, First Lieutenant Fred Glover, in speaking directly to the Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower on June 12, 1944. "I raised so much hell that General Eisenhower finally let me go back to my squadron," Yeager said. "He cleared me for combat after D-Day because all the free Frenchmen, Marquis, and people like that had surfaced." Eisenhower, after gaining permission from the War Department, agreed with Yeager and Glover. In the meantime, Yeager shot down his second enemy aircraft, a German Junkers Ju-88 bomber, over the English Channel. On October 12, 1944, he became the first pilot in his group to make ace in a day, downing 5 enemy aircraft in a single mission. 2 of these kills were scored without firing a single shot. When he flew into firing position against the Messerschmitt's Bf-109, the pilot of the aircraft panicked, braking to the starboard and colliding with his wingman. Yeager said both pilots bailed out. He finished the war with 11.5 official victories, including one of the first air-to-air victories over a jet fighter, a German Messerschmitt's Me-262, that he shot down as it was on final approach for landing. It was a P-51D 20 November Alpha that he named Glorious Glen 3 that gave Yeager most of his aerial victories.
In his 1986 memoirs, Yeager recalled with disgust that atrocities were committed by both sides, and said he went on a mission with orders from the 8th Air Force to strafe anything that moved. During the mission briefing, he whispered to Major Donald H. Bakke, "If we were going to do things like this, we sure as hell better make sure we are on the winning side." Yeager was later quoted as saying, "I'm certainly not proud of that particular strafing mission against civilians, but it is there on the record and in my memory." Yeager was commissioned a second lieutenant while at Leiston and was promoted to captain before the end of his tour. He flew his 61st and final mission on January 15th, 1945, and returned to the United States in early February. As an evader, he received his choice of assignments, and because his wife was pregnant, chose Wright Field to be near his home in West Virginia. His high number of flight hours and maintenance experience qualified him to become a functional test pilot of repaired aircraft, which brought him under the command of Colonel Albert Boyd, head of the Aeronautical Systems Flight Test Division.
Yeager broke the sound barrier on October 14, 1947 in the X-1. He remained in the Air Force after the war. After graduation from Air Material Command Flight Performance School, Class 46C, he became a test pilot at Muroc Army Airfield, which has since been renamed Edwards Air Force Base. After Bell aircraft test pilot Chalmers Slick Goodland demanded $150,000, which is over $1.7 million in today's dollars, to break the sound barrier, the USAF selected Yeager to fly the rocket-powered Bell XS-1 in an NACA program to research high-speed flight. Yeager later named the Bell X-1, which, as with all of the aircraft assigned to him, Glamorous Glennis after his wife.
His mission was so dangerous that the answer to many of the inherent questions at the time were promptly followed, with Yeager better have paid up his life insurance. 2 nights before the scheduled date of the flight, Yeager broke 2 ribs when he fell off a horse. He was worried that the injuries would remove him from the mission, and it was reported that he went to a civilian doctor in nearby Rosamond, who taped up his ribs without the Air Force even knowing about it. Besides his wife, who was riding with him, Yeager told only his friend and fellow project pilot Jack Ridley about the accident. On the day of the flight, Yeager was in such pain that he could not seal the X-1's hatch by himself. Ridley rigged up a device using the end of a broom handle as an extra lever to allow Yeager to seal the hatch. Yeager broke the sound barrier on October 14, 1947, flying the X-1 Glamorous Glennis at Mach 1.05 at an altitude of 45,000 feet over the Rogers Dry Lake bed in the Mojave Desert. The success of the mission was not announced to the public until June of 1948.
Yeager was awarded the McKay Trophy and the Collier Trophy in 1948 for his Mach transcending flight, and the Harmon International Trophy in 1954. The X-1 he flew that day was later put on permanent display at the Smithsonian Institution's National Air and Space Museum. Yeager went on to break many other speed and altitude records. He was also one of the first American pilots to fly a MiG-15 after its pilots, No Kum Sok, defected to South Korea. Returning to Muroc during the later half of 1953, Yeager was involved with the United States Air Force team that was working on the X-1A, an aircraft designed to surpass Mach 2 in level flight. Later that year, he flew a chase aircraft for the civilian pilot Jackie Cochran, as she became the first woman to fly faster than sound. On November 20th, 1953, the U.S. Navy program involving the D-5582 skyrocket and its pilot, Scott Crossfield, became the first team to reach twice the speed of sound. After they were bested, Ridley and Yeager decided to beat rival Crossfield's speed record in a series of test flights that they dubbed Operation NACA Weep.
Not only did they beat Crossfield by setting a new record at Mach 2.44 on December 12, 1953, but they did it in time to spoil a celebration planned for the 50th anniversary of flight, in which Crossfield was to be called the fastest man alive. The new record flight, however, did not entirely go to plan, since shortly after reaching Mach 2.44, Yeager lost control of the X-1A at about 80,000 feet due to inertia coupling, a phenomenon largely unknown at the time. With the aircraft simultaneously rolling, pitching, and yawing out of control, Yeager dropped to 51,000 feet in less than a minute before regaining control at around 29,000 feet. He then managed to land without further incident. For this achievement, Yeager was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal in 1954.
Yeager was foremost a fighter pilot and held several squadron and wing commands. From 1954 to 1957, he commanded the F-86H Sabre-equipped 417th Fighter Bomber Squadron, the 50th Fighter Bomber Wing at Hahn Air Base in West Germany, and Tol-Resures Air Base in France. And from 1957 to 1960, the F-100D Super Sabre-equipped 1st Fighter Day Squadron at George Air Force Base in California and Morón Air Base in Spain. By 1962, he was awarded the rank of full colonel after completion of a year's studies and final thesis on the STOL or STOL aircraft at the Air War College. Yeager became the first commandant of the USAF Aerospace Research Pilot School, which produced astronauts for NASA and the USAF, after its redesignation from the U.S. Air Force's Flight Test Pilot School. Fun fact, Yeager himself had only a high school education, so he was not eligible to become an astronaut like those that he trained.
In April 1962, Yeager flew for the only time with Neil Armstrong. Their job, flying a T-33, was to evaluate Smith Ranch Dry Lake in Nevada for use as an emergency landing site for the X-15. In his autobiography, Yeager wrote that he knew the lake bed was unsuitable for landings after recent rains, but Armstrong insisted on flying out anyway. As they attempted to touch and go, the wheels became stuck and they had to wait for rescue. Between December 1963 and January 1964, Yeager completed 5 flights in the NASA M2 F1 lifting body. An accident during a December 1963 test flight in one of the school's NF-104s eventually put an end to his record attempts.
In 1966, Yeager took command of the 405th Tactical Fighter Wing at Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, whose squadrons were deployed on rotational temporary duty in South Vietnam and elsewhere in Southeast Asia. There he flew 127 missions. In February 1968, Yeager was assigned command of the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, and led the McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom II Wing in South Korea during the Pueblo crisis. Yeager was promoted to Brigadier General and was assigned in July 1969 as the Vice Commander of the 17th Air Force.
From 1971 to 1973, at the behest of Ambassador Joe Farland, Yeager was assigned to Pakistan to advise the Pakistan Air Force. A small passenger aircraft that was assigned by the Pentagon to Yeager was damaged during an air raid by the Indian Air Force at a Pakistan airbase during the 1971 war between India and Pakistan. Edward C. Ingram, a U.S. diplomat who had served as political counselor to Ambassador Farland in Islamabad, recalled this incident in the Washington Monthly of October of 1985. He was quoted as saying, after Yeager's Beechcraft was destroyed during an Indian air raid, he raged to his cowering colleagues that the Indian pilot that had been specifically instructed by Indira Gandhi to blast his plane. It was, he later wrote, the Indian way of giving Uncle Sam the finger. Yeager was incensed over the incident and demanded U.S. retaliation.
On March 1st, 1975, following assignments in Germany and Pakistan, Yeager retired from the U.S. Air Force at Norton Air Force Base, California. Yeager made a cameo appearance in the movie The Right Stuff in 1983. He played Fred, a bartender at Pancho's place, which was most appropriate, as Yeager said, if all the hours were ever totaled, I reckon I spent more time at her place than in a cockpit over those years. His own role in the movie was played by Sam Shepard.
For several years in the 1980s, Yeager was connected to General Motors, publicizing AC Delco, the company's automotive parts division. In 1986, he was invited to drive the Chevrolet Corvette pace car for the 70th running of the Indianapolis 500, and again in 1988, this time at the wheel of an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. In 1986, President Reagan appointed Yeager to the Rogers Commission that investigated the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger. During this time, Yeager also served as a technical advisor for 3 Electronic Arts flight simulator video games. The games include Chuck Yeager's Advanced Flight Trainer, Chuck Yeager's Advanced Flight Trainer 2.0, and Chuck Yeager's Air Combat. The game manuals featured quotes and anecdotes from Yeager, and all were well received by players. Missions featured several of Yeager's accomplishments and let players attempt to top his records. Chuck Yeager's Advanced Flight Trainer was Electronic Arts' top-selling game for 1987.
In 2009, Yeager participated in the documentary The Legend of Pancho Barnes and Happy Bottom Riding Club, a profile of his friend Pancho Barnes. The documentary was screened at film festivals, aired on public television in the United States, and won an Emmy Award. On October 14th of 1997, on the 50th anniversary of his historic flight past Mach 1, he flew a new glamorous Glenn III, an F-15D Eagle, past Mach 1. The chase plane for the flight was an F-16 Fighting Falcon piloted by Bob Hoover, a longtime test pilot, fighter, and acrobatic pilot. He had been Yeager's wingman for the first supersonic flight. At the end of his speech to the crowd in 1997, Yeager concluded, "All that I am, I owe to the Air Force." Later that month, he was a recipient of the Tony Jannus Award for his achievements. On October 14th of 2012, on the 65th anniversary of breaking the sound barrier, Yeager did it again at the age of 89, flying as co-pilot in a McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle piloted by Captain Dave Vincent of the Nellis Air Force Base. In 1973, Yeager was inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame, arguably aviation's highest honor.
In 1974, Yeager received the Golden Plate Award of the American Academy of Achievement.
In December 1975, the U.S. Congress awarded Yeager a silver medal equivalent to a non-combat Medal of Honor for contributing immeasurably to aerospace science by risking his life in piloting the X-1 research airplane faster than the speed of sound on October 14, 1947. President Gerald Ford presented the medal to Yeager in a ceremony at the White House on December 8, 1976.
Yeager, who never attended college and was often modest about his background, is considered by many, including Flying Magazine, the California Hall of Fame, the state of West Virginia, the National Aviation Hall of Fame, a few U.S. presidents, and the United States Army Air Force, to be one of the greatest pilots of all time. Despite his lack of higher education, he was honored in his home state. Marshall University has named its highest academic scholarship the Society of Yeager Scholars in his honor. Yeager was also the chairman of Experimental Aircraft Association's Young Eagle program from 1994 to 2004 and was named the program's chairman emeritus.
In 1966, Yeager was inducted into the International Air and Space Hall of Fame. He was inducted into the International Space Hall of Fame in 1981. He was inducted into Aerospace Walk of Honor 1990 inaugural class.
Yeager Airport in Charleston, West Virginia is named in his honor. The Interstate 64, Interstate 77 bridge over the Kanawha River in Charleston is named in his honor. He also flew directly under the Kanawha Bridge, and West Virginia named it to the Chuck E. Yeager Bridge.
On October 19th of 2006, the state of West Virginia also honored Yeager with a marker along Corridor G, part of U.S. Highway 119, in his home Lincoln County, and also renamed part of the highway the Yeager Highway.
Yeager was an honorary board member of the humanitarian organization Wings of Hope. On August 25, 2009, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and Maria Shriver announced that Yeager would be one of 13 California Hall of Fame inductees in the California Museum's year-long exhibit. The induction ceremony was on December 1st, 2009 in Sacramento, California.
Flying Magazine ranked Yeager number 5 on its 2013 list of the 51 heroes of aviation. For many years, he was the highest-ranked living person on the list.
The Civil Air Patrol, the volunteer auxiliary of the U.S. Air Force, awards the Charles E. Chuck Yeager Award to its senior members as part of its aerospace education program. We all know the name Chuck Yeager, but did any of us really understand the man behind the legendary name? To say he was the best of us is not a hard idea to agree with. So many aviators have honored his legacy with phrases like, "I'm no Chuck Yeager, but," or "I made a landing that even Chuck would approve of." On December 7th of this year, 2020, we lost a great aviator and mentor to us all. So raise a glass to Chuck. You will be missed, but never forgotten.
And in closing, a customary and traditional saying to fighter pilots that have moved on to the heavenly side, we use a phrase, toss a nickel on the grass. So here's a little quote that I took out of an article that basically sums up the quote. So here's a nickel on the grass to you, my friend, and your spirit, enthusiasm, sacrifice, and courage. But most of all, to your friendship. Yours is a dying breed, and when you are gone, the world will be a lesser place. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck. So this was a really cool thing to do. I think this is the first time that the three of us have sat down to pay tribute to a fallen aviator. And I gotta say, it was a very enlightening research to get done. Used primarily the interwebs to find all this information. Let me just say there'll be a Wikipedia link in the show notes where you can find the information and hyperlinks to every little aspect of this this tribute. Man, talk about an inspiration. To fly with broken ribs and do something like that. I mean, granted, he hit it from the U.S. Air Force, which would undoubtedly have grounded him and put in the replacement. But we would not be saying to this day, you know, the best of us is Chuck. How many times have we heard that? I mean, so it's an inspiring story.
Yeah. It's a testament to the individuals back in that day who were willing to risk their lives to better, you know, the cause. And, you know, this whole age and time, 50s, 1960s, you know, they're trying to, you know, advance aviation, and they really, you know, didn't have anything to help them other than their, you know, intuitive minds, their curious minds, and, you know, just the great engineers that they had back in the day to try to figure out how to break the sound barrier and all the challenges that it posed. And, you know, they didn't have, I guess I was watching an episode where they were talking about having wind tunnel tests of some of these models to try to break the sound barrier. And he was saying they were able to you know, to replicate or actually break the sound barrier of the model in the wind tunnel. But he said the problem that they were experiencing was whenever the shock wave would form, the wind tunnel's dimensions would distort the actual shock wave. So they never actually had accurate data beyond the actual shock wave. So they had no way of knowing what was going to really happen in the real flight. And the only way to do it is for somebody like Chuck to volunteer and say, I'll do it, and then go up there and test it out. And, you know, as we all know, the air, you know, is very, very unforgiving. I mean, there's zero room for error, and anything, you know, just the smallest miscalculation can result in, you know, death or destruction of the aircraft. So these guys were very, very brave.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think of how crazy it was to go out and basically volunteer to do something like that. Then also thinking about all the engineers who came up with this stuff, because they had no information to go off of either.
Yeah.
And then, you know, in our case, Yeager putting his hands in those engineers, you know,
his life in their hands. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But having no information, because aviation was still so young back then, and nobody
Part of the
had
greatest generation. It's part of the
any
greatest
idea
generation.
what was going to happen. And those guys, putting their heads together and saying, "Hey, well, I think this sounds good." And then, Yeager going, "Okay, well, sure. I like what you guys said. Let's go try it, because what can go wrong?"
Yep.
What could go wrong? Never ask that question when you're a test pilot.
What's the worst that can happen?
Exactly, yeah.
Nickels in the grass. That's the
It's
worst that can
amazing.
happen. I tell you
Yep.
right now.
Yeah.
Well, what is Mach
exactly.
number? We learned this in aviation, and we actually learned this kind of in a private pilot setting. They skim over it, and we don't really get back into it until we start working on ATPs, because up until that point, if you're flying a piston-powered aircraft, your Mach is so far from what you're ever going to need to know. But we learned that Mach number is the ratio of an object's speed in a given medium to the speed of sound that in that medium. So Mach 1 then is the speed of sound around 761 miles per hour at sea level on a standard day. The term is also used as a metaphor for high speeds more generally. Now, we fly aircraft around Mach 0.7 to Mach 0.8 typically, commercial airliners. And Roger actually has the luxury of traveling a little faster and a little higher than most commercial airliners, simply because of the equipment that he flies. Roger, what's like the fastest Mach number that you typically will fly at?
Like typically?
Well, typically in the fastest that you've gone.
Typically we go 8.3. Fastest I've gone is 0.9.
Really? That's subsonic,
Wow.
Is it not? Or is that 0.92?
I think that is getting up and getting into the subsonic range. I'm not sure when it actually starts happening.
Mhm.
But yeah, the Falcon 7X was rated to 9.0, and so it's something that you got to do so you can say you did it.
That's cool.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
7.2 is the typical like generic airliner speed, because it gives you the best ratio of fuel burn to ground speed on a typical day. Everything else considered equal. We can go up to 8.1 in the Airbus. What is it in the 7.3, Rob?
Yeah, I think so. You got me there. I think it is 8.2.
Okay. Well,
in the 7.3.
and I'm just looking this up. Subsonic is actually 8.80 and above would be a subsonic, or 0.80 and below would be subsonic, and above that is getting into the other. What are the other regimes? Transonic, and then
transitioning in the sonic,
sonic, and then hypersonic, supersonic. Yeah. So I mean,
we don't talk about it enough to know what it is.
Yeah, it's like okay, 0.80. Okay. Maintain
exactly.
Like I say, 1, 2, 3. I'll maintain 0.81 or better. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. I can't do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does get to a point where you're burning more fuel than it's worth. You're not saving any fuel there. So, and that's the name of the game when you're dealing with commercial aviation is cost per flight. But yeah, man, my hat's off to Chuck.
Yeah. So I was just pointing out this aircraft that I have on my green screen behind me. Obviously, if you're listening to it on the podcast, you can't see it, but it is a F111. This particular model is an EF111A model, and it was produced by the General Dynamics Aircraft Corporation here in Fort Worth, Texas. I had the privilege of going for a ride in one of these. I was a crew chief, just like Chuck Yeager, on this aircraft behind me. This particular aircraft is assigned to Cannon Air Force Base in Clovis, New Mexico, the 27th Fighter Wing. I got a ride in this particular aircraft back in 1997 in Saudi Arabia, and I went 1.3 Mach in that airplane.
Wow.
So I didn't even know it, but
and so once you get
the pilot looked over at me and said, "We're going faster than the speed of sound." I looked over him like, "Oh, okay."
Did it get quiet,
cool.
or was it that you didn't even know?
Didn't even know it. We felt a little shudder from the airplane. I think that was the shock wave.
Okay.
But there was a lot of shuddering anyways, as normal little turbulence. And we were up around, I think we were up around 24,000 feet when we did it. But as an airplane flies, obviously we all know if it's not perfectly smooth, you feel a little, rhythmic chop or whatever. And it wasn't any different in this plane. We just had a little rhythmic chop. So when we did pass, the actual speed of sound, I don't think I really noticed. I think he mentioned it to me, like, oh, there's the thump, which I wasn't a pilot at the time. I'm a crew chief, so I had no clue what the thump was in aviation terms or pilot speak. So, but I do remember him saying something. And so now that I think back, that was probably the little thump that you feel when you pass the sound barrier. And then after that, it was just, flying like normal.
That's so cool.
But I do remember we were pouring a whole bunch of gas out the tailpipe. that thing has 2 huge afterburning engines. And man, I think we were in the area of 80,000 pounds an hour.
Oh my God.
We're burning.
Your tax dollars at work, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
the Rob can go Mach 1.3.
So I can have fun. Put another notch on the belt.
That's it, man.
Actually, I think that was probably the first notch.
That's
anyway,
so sweet.
I thought that was
and
pretty
thank
cool.
you for sharing that with us. That's awesome.
But if it wasn't for Chuck Yeager, I mean, planes like the F-111 behind me, probably wouldn't have been, designed. This particular airplane is a swing wing fighter bomber. Most people don't realize that airplane was designed that was in competition for the U.S. Navy's contract, which we all know that the F-14 actually won that contract. And the Air Force saw the design as a really cool platform that they could use for fighter bombers. And they extended the nose, where is it over here? Put a little terrain following radar, and that airplane can drop down to about 100 feet. Flip on the autopilot and a couple other switches, and hands off flying. It'll follow the terrain.
Oh.
And basically try to evade radar low level at high speeds. I think unclassified, I'd have to look it up, but I think unclassified, that airplane can unclassified up to 2.5 Mach.
Wow.
Actually, it says 2.5 plus on that thing. Yeah,
How
I don't
much
think
plus
it goes
they don't
that
tell you.
straight and level, but I think they can come in from a dive or any kind of a extreme maneuver and exceed 2.5 Mach and not damage the airplane.
Wow.
It's pretty intense. Yeah. It's a cool design.
And that really is a great example of ingenuity. I mean, that aircraft has been around, the F-111 has been around for a long time. Can you only imagine?
It's since retired, but
Can you imagine the data points on things like the F-35 and the F-22? I mean,
insane.
We know what we know, but there's so much data that we don't know. It's classified information, and it's just amazing. The engineering, just everything about fighter aircraft, military aircraft is just the inquisitive,
nature of that aviation mind to see where we can go from here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for helping me share this episode out with our viewers. And I'd just like to say thank you to our listeners for listening to the Squawk Ident podcast. And we really do hope that you are enjoying the Squawk Ident podcast that we put out every week. Every episode is special to us. If you do and have found value in our podcast, we encourage you to visit our website at aviatortony.com. That's Alpha, Victor, the number 8, Romeo, Tango, Oscar, November, Yankee.com. From there, on the homepage, you can find methods to contribute to our show by becoming a producer with either a one-time donation or recurring contributions. Every little bit helps with the production and marketing expenses of the show. You can also leave us some audio feedback and show topic suggestions that you would like us to cover. You can also view the many photos that we've shared from the flight line and under the guest book tab, where you can view images from our featured guests that we've been able to share with you. Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube users can find us under the Squawk Ident podcast search. We encourage you to support our YouTube channel with a like, subscribe, and a share. In closing, I'd like to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen to these grateful aviators. Keep the dirty side down out there, be safe, and take care of each other. Bye, everyone.
Have a good one. Take care.